Hello, Matthew, the average gun owner here. I just wanted to make this quick video and ask everybody watching it to please share it. Please share it. It's a very important message I'm going to say here. So, I've said it before. The verdict doesn't matter in this trial. It's the trial that matters here. And let me tell you why I say that. It's a couple of things I'm hearing are, this is an issue of whether the Kenosha Kid engaged in use of reasonable force. And then there's an issue of, well, was he just a vigilante out there looking for trouble? And those are really the items on trial. The judge spent an hour giving instructions to the jury on how to decide the case. I mean, let's be honest, if you haven't, spent years in law school, to be able to sit there and retain an hour's worth of instructions, I don't care if he printed out for you or not, it's going to be very difficult to actually apply the law here, which is why the prosecution is trying to play on emotions here. We've had some situations where some absolute falsehoods were communicated regarding firearms. I think the most atrocious of which was the display of poor and unsafe gun handling by the prosecution in this case, where he literally shouldered a real firearm, pointed it at people in the courtroom with his finger on the trigger. And that was done just to inflame the jury and push the narrative that Kyle was the only one who was a threat there. Nobody else was a threat to Kyle. Kyle was the only threat out there that night. And he purposefully broke almost every rule in the book in terms of firearm handling and safety in order to elicit an emotion to get a conviction. And I think that's morally wrong. But let me get to the point here. For decades, people have been telling us that you shouldn't possess a firearm for self-defense because it's just more likely that firearm will be used against you. Well, I think that argument is done and gone. I think if anybody ever makes that argument again, you can say, well, I don't know, this prosecutor in Kenosha is arguing to the jury that it was a absolute impossibility that this firearm could have been used against him because he was wearing a sling. So if that's really the issue, if you think, you're looking out for my own good and you're telling me I shouldn't possess a firearm out in public for self-defense because it's just going to get used against me, all right, then I'll put a lanyard on my pistol or I'll put a sling on my rifle, because according to this prosecution, that's impossible, that it could not have possibly been used against me. I mean, that's that literally is the whole case they're making, that, the first individual that was charging against him, who had already threatened to kill him, was now charging against him, was just going to punch him. You don't bring, I think they even played a clip from the movie Roadhouse, you don't bring a gun to a fist fight. He was just going to punch him, and the sling was holding that firearm on. There's no way he could have used it against him. Well, unfortunately, defense doesn't have the benefit of knowing the prosecution's case, ahead of time. But, here's a typical rifle sling, right? And they are made with plastic buckles, mostly for a fail-safe. Garbage truck comes by and catches on your rifle or your sling, there's a fail-safe point so it doesn't rip your head off. And by the way, somebody grabs a sling, that's all it takes. That's literally all it takes to dispossess them of a firearm. So, again, I guess the main point there is, I guess the argument that you shouldn't possess a gun for self-defense because it will just get used against you has now been, disproven, I guess, if in the prosecutor's own mind, that's impossible. It couldn't be used against you. And the second issue, a friend of mine said, well, we don't want vigilantes running around, and that's really what this trial is about. All right, so you say it's okay if we get a conviction against him because he's a vigilante. I get it. I agree. If I were him, I wouldn't have done what he did. I don't think a 17-year-old kid, I don't think it's a good choice in life to, carry a rifle to a building of somebody who isn't near and dear to your heart to keep that business from being burnt down. He was there for a deterrent effect. I think the prosecution's trying to argue he's a vigilante who was out there looking to shoot looters. Okay, well, he wasn't out there and he wasn't shooting looters, and he ran away when somebody came after him who was an individual who had threatened to kill him before and was starting fires and such. But okay, that's something for a jury to decide. I get it. But, think about the precedent that we're going to set. So in this case, the judge threw out the firearm possession charge against the Kenosha Kid. Said it was not illegal under the law for him to possess that long arm that night, that rifle. We do have one of the individuals who attacked the Kenosha Kid who was carrying illegally that night because his permit expired. So if anybody wasn't allowed to carry the pistol, it was that guy. And just to be clear, the reason Kyle, and there was testimony to this, and I didn't see anything that countered this assertion, but the reason he was carrying a rifle is because of his age. It would have been illegal under any circumstance for him to possess a handgun, especially concealed handgun. So the only legal option he had was to deter attacks against him was open carry of a rifle. And I get it. You could say, well, it just wasn't a good idea for him to do it. Okay. So if that's going to be the argument, and this is going to be how prosecutions are going to go, then I guess all those people in the Chaz and the autonomous zones who were open carrying long arms to create their own quote unquote private security force there, that was a provocation then. And anybody who opposed them could have come up and rushed them or shot back at them or done whatever. And you're telling me those people would have been granted the defense of self-defense. So, really think that went through. Yeah, I get it. Probably wasn't the best choice to do what this kid did. Probably should not have been there, but he had the legal right to be there. And the judge has confirmed that by dismissing the firearm possession charge and allowing the self-defense to go forward to a jury. So you may like it, you may not like it, but let's be honest, they're using this as a bellwether case to try to attack your right to self-defense and have the upper hand. It's kind of sad. The way I look at this case is, I remember when I was growing up, there was, this argument against, accusations made in rape culture where people would say, she was wearing a short skirt or, tight clothes. She was basically asking for it. Well, okay, so you're saying because this guy exercised constitutionally protected right, the Supreme Court has stated that we have, and that is to possess a firearm for self-defense, that by exercising that right, I was asking for it. I was asking for somebody to attack me because I was the provocation in that case. So that's basically what's on trial here. They couldn't convince the Supreme Court to deny you of the right, so they're trying to do it culturally. And let's be honest, that is essentially what is at stake here. And the arguments that they're making today, to me, are akin to the arguments they make for a woman wearing a short skirt walking to her car in a dark parking lot after work, that somehow, she was asking for it, that, she provoked that man and got his urges going. And I mean, come on, are we still going there in this day and age? Because that's literally what the people who oppose the right to possess a firearm for self-defense are arguing. They are making the she was asking for it argument in this case, and in the case of you or anyone else who would carry a firearm for self-defense. And I really think, I guess the only nice way to say it is it seems a bit immoral to me to be making that argument and trying to deny people of the rights that way. But that's where we are, and I think that's what this trial is all about. Like I said, whether this kid gets convicted or not, I think is completely irrelevant. I think the main issue here is that we now have people that oppose people possessing firearms for self-defense arguing kind of a hypocritical argument to what they've been arguing for decades, that the guns, it's for our own safety that we should be banned from carrying guns because they'll just be used against us. And then we show up in a trial and they're like, no, it would have been impossible for them to use that gun against him, so he had no right to use lethal force the way he did. And judge let that argument go forward. The judge allowed that to be argued and presented to the jury. And the real scary thing is I think this judge has been doing a pretty good job. I think the judge has been pretty fair in this case with his ruling. So if I see a judge that I believe is acting as fair and impartial as he can, allowing that to go forward, well, what would happen in a state where the right to self-defense isn't popular? That's going to happen more often. I know everybody sees those cases, in certain sheriff's jurisdictions where if somebody uses a firearm in self-defense, that sheriff's like, well, you know what? You have the right to self-defense, and that's how we view this. And unless I see some egregious behavior, we're not even going to refer this for an indictment or, for a grand jury or an indictment. We're going to close the case and call it justified shooting. Not everybody lives in those jurisdictions. And unfortunately, you have a kid who lived in a jurisdiction where people didn't care enough to go out and protect their own neighborhoods and support local law enforcement in pushing out the element who wanted to burn down the city. And now those are the same people who are being asked to judge, this kid. So I think you have a group of people in the city who made bad judgments and didn't do what was necessary to protect their communities, now having to pass judgment on somebody else who may have made a bad judgment. And what really is going to happen here is it's going to have an effect in a cultural sense on the right of everybody to possess a firearm for self-defense. So, for me, it boils down to, if you truly are the victim in that case, it shouldn't be a fair fight. You should have every possible advantage at your disposal. That woman walking home late at work, trying to, provide for her family, has no choice but to commute in and out of the city, which is why I hope the Supreme Court rules the way we all think they should in the New York case, has no choice but to come home on that train at 11:30 and walk into that, poorly lit parking garage by herself, being followed. If someone were to attack her, my God, I want her to have every upper hand, an advantage that she could possibly have in that fight. I have no problem with that, and that's what I believe. So please share this with everybody, and I hope this message came across clear enough, or as I intended it to. There's 100 million other things that I wanted to discuss about this case, but when I really sat down this morning and thought about it, I really think that's what it comes down to. I mean, we kind of have a hypocritical position here of, you shouldn't have a gun, it'd just be used against you, to it would have been impossible for them to use it against him because it was a small piece of plastic holding it to his body. I mean, that's literally where we are with the right of self-defense in America. We need to fix it. I think we need stronger laws, and I know they, it burden of the prosecution to prove that he didn't act reasonably, but I believe we need what's akin to like the Castle Doctrine and stand your ground in these situations, in all situations, and that I think the presumption should be to the benefit of the defendant if the defendant is not considered the initial aggressor. I think the only fact decision the jury needs to make is, was him carrying that firearm in and of itself make him the initial aggressor? I think the fact that the judge dropped that charge tells us pretty much as a matter of law, no. I think the just question is, once somebody started attacking and charging him for the mere fact that he was holding a firearm, that person's the initial aggressor. And just the fact that you have a firearm, that you brought a gun to a fist fight, which I think if you're the innocent victim, you should have the right to do, that in itself, as a matter of law, should not negate his right to self-defense. And I think we need different jury charges, and I think we need affirmative presumptions in the favor of an individual using the defense of self-defense once they show a minimal showing that they had the right to use self-defense in the first place. Maybe the initial aggressor question is a question you leave for the jury, but I think what the prosecution here is doing is not making the argument of who the initial aggressor is. He's just saying it was wrong for Kyle to even think about using a firearm for self-defense in the first place. And that essentially, from what I see from the arguments and the facts that the prosecution's trying to present, that's the argument that they're trying to make, the appeal they're trying to make to this jury. And I think it's wrong, and we all need to be cognizant of that, and we all need to understand that when talking to the layperson who doesn't understand the law, doesn't understand firearm safety, still believes those misconceptions, that you're more likely to just have the firearm used against you, that concealed carry permits are just going to result in the wild, wild west, which is interesting because we have over a dozen constitutional carry states, over 20 million or something, permits, issued out there, and no, that just didn't happen. So I think the facts need to be borne out in the public eye. So again, Matthew, the average gun owner, everybody, please share this video. Thank you.